Welcome, welcome. It's book club episode here at Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. Amanda and I met through a book club. So when we were building kind of the pillars of our podcast content, book club was a pretty natural thing. Plus, we're both just natural bookworms. We love books. We can never read enough. And having somebody to talk about it with is a special bonus. So pretty awesome. So my name is Meagan, and I already kind of jumped the gun and introduced you, but my fabulous co-host is
Amanda.
And our current book club selection, if you are just joining us, is Normal Sucks by Jonathan Mooney. The tagline is How to Live, Learn, and Think Outside the Lines. And this is Jonathan Mooney's third book. They're all amazing, but this one is a particular favorite. And I'm going to let you in on a little hint, is that through the magic of podcast recording and schedule shuffling, we've already conducted our author interview with Jonathan Mooney. Amanda and I've read the whole book, and we've chatted with him, and it was amazing. So when we are finished with our own book club discussion, we'll air that episode, and it is not to be missed. He is even more epic in person than he is on the page. So that was pretty awesome. Today we'll be discussing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say it was really great. I'm still not 100% sure how we convinced him to come on our podcast. But I'm not gonna, I'm super. Yeah, it was great. It was awesome.
Yeah. We booked it before we had ever even aired an episode. We had a bunch of episodes banked for our launch day. And I was like, I have no stats. We have no audience. Do you want to come chat with us about neurodivergence and normalcy and weirdness and all that? And he was like, yeah, I'm in. So huge shout out to Jonathan Mooney. We had the greatest time ever kind of fangirling for our first author visit on the podcast, which was super, super awesome.
Yeah, that's it. So I knew nothing about him, and now I'm fangirling. So there we go.
I love it. Today we'll be talking about sections 3 and 4 in the book. Before we jump right in, we've got lots to share and lots of thoughts. But before we jump right in, I want to share just a quick reminder that we are doing a giveaway of this book, Normal Sucks. So you can enter. There will be a link to enter in the description for the podcast. There's also one on our Instagram bio in our link tree of magical links. The giveaway ends July 20th, 2024. So go ahead and enter. You have a choice between, if you're in the US, between a physical book or an ebook or an audiobook, depending on how you prefer to read. If you're overseas, an ebook or an audiobook, but everyone is welcome. Please go ahead and enter. We're so excited to be able to share this awesome book with more people. So, Amanda, if anybody's just joining us for our first time for book club, do you have to read the book to listen to the book club episode?
No, how hypocritical would that be? I'm one of the worst people about showing up to book club without having read. I do read for this one, for the record. For anyone who has questions, I don't. I do make sure that I read for this one. But yeah, if you come and you hear what we're saying and you're like, oh, that seems like a really good book, I'd actually like to read that. By all means, join us or read it after we're done. And if you're like, dude, I do not have time to read a book. I do not want to listen to an audiobook. I got enough things. When I have time to listen to something, I just want to listen to a podcast. Then come listen, take the SparksNote version and be like, yeah, I totally know that book. And you can sound like you read it, and you can sound extra smart without ever having to read it.
Exactly. So without further ado, you want to kick us off with your first amazing note from section 3 this week? What did you love, Amanda?
So this book is an interesting read for me. I am really enjoying the book. It is not, it's definitely different from our last book, right? And so I'll just start by saying, so section 3 is called Abnormal, and it's all about the history of how human variation went from normal to being called abnormalities, right? So it wasn't just like, oh, these are normal people and this is, this isn't normal. It went into like, okay, well, now if you're not normal, you have abnormalities. And so this particular section is maybe not the happiest read, but it's still a good read. It's informative. It's full of stories that are funny and relatable and engaging. And it still has, Jonathan Mooney, he's just a really good writer. He's a really enjoyable writer. So he could cover really awful, sad, terrible things. And with his humor and the way that he weaves the story together, you'd be like, hey, this is a great book. Everyone should read it. And there's a little bit of that going on here with section 3. So we'll start. The first kind of thing that I pulled out was on page 44, right? It's a great example. The author gets a letter from a boy in England who wants to be a writer, but the boy's teacher tells him that he can't become a writer because he can't spell. He's terrible at spelling. And, one of those asides, like that has anything at all to do with being a good writer, right? No one cares whether or not you can spell. Like, it's so far removed by the time it gets published. Like, hello, that's a stupid thing.
Yeah. I mean, maybe you shouldn't be an editor, but writer, go for it, right?
Right. Yeah. And
Those are
probably
two
don't
separate
go
jobs.
and yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. But the boy concludes the letter by saying that he's rubbish because he's been told over and over again that he's rubbish at schoolwork and reading and, et cetera, yada, yada, yada. And the author asks, quote, "How the hell do we still have a world where a kid with so much good in him feels like human garbage?" And it's so true, right? There is so much systemic ableism and socially acceptable bullying. And it's so, how do we change that? I listened to this section in the car with my family. We were driving on a road trip, and so we were listening to it together and then talking about it. And my husband was like, well, I feel like we're really tackling that in our own home and helping, dismantle some of that and address some of that. He's like, but how do you fix it in the world if you can't fix it in public schools? And I think that's so true, right? It's a bit disheartening.
Yeah. I mean, there's a story, I don't think we've gotten to it yet in the book, but where Jonathan Mooney himself in college is told, like, you can't do that because you're crap at X, Y, or Z, right? And it's the same thing. It's like, why do we have educators who are doing this anyway? I mean, instead of saying to a kid, you can't do that because you can't spell, why aren't we helping this kid figure out, tools to work around a challenge that they have, or, something like that. But I can't even fathom the concept of saying that to a kid where it's like, you'll never be any good at that because of this, this difference that you have, or this shortcoming that you have, or this disability that you have. I can't even fathom that, right? It's just, there's providing feedback, there's providing realistic information, and then there's just, slapping somebody down so hard, right? I mean, it's unfathomable to me that people do that, and that those people oftentimes work in the field of education. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, no, that thing of like, okay, maybe you feel like it's really important in your job to say, if you want to go that route, you do need to understand that there will be some challenges because of this, or you may come up against this, and you'll need to be prepared for how you're going to convince them that that's not the whole story. But to just, oh, you can't do that because you're crap at this. Like, what?
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So in our last episode this week, when we talked about curriculum and things like that, I mentioned that one of my kids has a handwriting tutor that he works with one-on-one on OutSchool. And so we're unschoolers. I don't require that of my child. But it was, for him, math is very important to him. And he has big goals surrounding math. And he has a math mentor who he works with in a group setting and then also one-on-one. And his math tutor and they were having a conversation about goals and what he wants to do. And in a very constructive and positive way said, hey, I think all of that's doable. One thing we might want to tackle in preparation of those goals is some handwriting stuff, because my kiddo was still, I mean, he's 12 and he's taking college math, but he's writing numbers upside down. He's writing numbers backwards. He's brilliantly neurodivergent, right? So one is not linked to the other. Handwriting and math are on separate planets for him, right? And so his math teacher said, I'm okay. I know your numbers at this point. I know how your nines look. I know, he said, but sometimes in college, they're not always as flexible, or they don't always take as much time to decipher what you've got there. And so he said, if these are some of your goals, it might be worthwhile for us to put some time into handwriting. And so my kiddo was all in on handwriting because it links to one of his goals. But my teacher in another world, his math teacher might have just said, like, there's no way you're going to be able to take a college math class because when you write a 9 upside down, they're just going to mark it wrong, And so it's like, there's two very different sides of that coin.
Yeah.
So
that's it. I mean, Totally.
Yeah. Well, I made the same story. So that little boy who wrote the letter, his name was Elliot, right? And on the next
Mhm.
page on 45, I made a note where it says, in the text, it says, the answer, of course, is that the normal needs the Elliots of the world to be on the bottom. Normal has always been propped up by and constructed on the bodies and the lives of the not normal. So it's almost like a caste system, right? It's like,
Mhm.
I am better because I am above those people. As long as there's somebody underneath me, I'm always okay. And then it says, and to be on the bottom of that pile, to be the negation of normal, that is its foundation, is to not just differ from normal, it is to be normal's opposite, abnormal, which is false and wrong. And so it's almost like there always has to be, if you look at history, right? You know, I'm a history nerd. There's always been a group in history. We still have it to this day. There's always been a group that has to be the outcast, that has to be the villain, that has to be the one that we're targeting in some way, right? It's been part of society forever, right? Remember, you know, like I'm Irish. So of course, like, you know, the whole back in the day, like no Irish need apply. There were, you know, window stickers and stuff like that, right? You know, there's always a group in history that for whatever reason was needed to be put lower than everyone else. And we've had it all throughout. And it changes based upon what's going on, right? Of course, there have been racial divides and sexual divides and gender divides and, ethnic divides, all of these things. But it's like there always needs to be somebody who's less than in order for everybody else to be above them. And
Yeah.
it's just such a huge kind of cancerous sore on society when we look at it that way.
Mhm. No, exactly. And I think it was that section that made me type up the little comment, the socially acceptable bullying, this
Mm-hmm.
caste system, you know, like you have to have, and, you know, I mean, we teach kids all the time that this is what bullying is, and bullies put others down to make themselves feel better. And yet we have this, like it's built into our society that we're going to do that on a regular, consistent basis to make sure that normal people feel normal and good about themselves.
Right. Yeah. To the point that people are then striving to be in that category because there's an advantage to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. So I'm going to preface this by saying Meagan held up her book earlier. I can hold up mine. I have a lot of tabs, and I'm not going to cover all of them because we'd be here. This would be like the 5-hour book club this week. So we don't need to do that to anybody. But I will cover a few different things and kind of do some general ideas that cover lots of pages or lots of stories for me. So only a couple pages later, in this case, on page 47, there's the story of his mom. And he talks about how she's reading her assessment report, right? He's had an IEP meeting. He's had all the assessments. They've had the meeting. She's got the report. She's reading the report with anger. And, you know, she's cursing and she's mumbling and she's reading parts of it out loud, even though she doesn't really mean to. And it's just one of those things, like it's a super relatable part of the story for anyone who has gone through that process. But it is also an excellent example of what a great storyteller he is, right? I think everyone processes trauma in different ways. And I would say that he processes his trauma with some humor and you know, and that's probably all part of it. I know that I process some of my trauma with sharing and, you know, trying to educate people on it and things like that. But it's just an excellent example of his really engaging writing style and how he can take something that's really serious and quite frankly depressing for
Mm-hmm.
anyone who's experienced it and turn it into this great story where you can kind of laugh and be like, oh shit, been there, done that, you know? I really appreciated that.
Well, and I think too, I mean, as a society, also, we tend to not share the really messy parts. That's one of the things that I love about the concept of our podcast is like, we will totally show up and say, you know, today has been a total shit show, you know. And I think the more people, and social media has probably had a role in this too, but the more people hide the reality of their life and show the shiny parts of their life, the harder it is for other people because they're sitting there thinking, my life is a total shit show. And look at this person. They've got it all together. Everything's buttoned up. It's so sparkly. It's so clean. And so I feel like when people like him share in the book this experience of the IEP and the results and the testing and the whole, and his experience and all of that too, it's just so helpful for other people to be like, oh, it's not just me, right?
Mhm.
I've talked before about the fact that my kiddo watched Hannah Gadsby's Douglas comedy special on Netflix. And, he was like, oh my gosh, that's me. That's how I can't. And he was young enough that he was like, I couldn't put it into words. Not that I think anyone could like Hannah Gadsby. She is a freaking, she's a genius. Her writing skill is so genius. It's not even funny.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is funny because she's a comedian, but you get my point. Right. Not that I think too many people could have put it into words like that, but when he heard it, he was like, that's exactly how I feel. That's exactly my experience. That's exactly how I feel. And so I feel like for him to put it in the book like this and to just bear it all and say like, this is exactly what happened. It's so comforting for other people who maybe feel alone in those same situations or feel like it's just them.
Yeah. No, for real. For sure. So after that story, we've got more stories and more examples, right? There are lots of examples of rich, educated, straight, able-bodied white men doing research that proves that straight, able-bodied white guys, oftentimes rich, are the norm, right?
Yeah, go
Shocker,
figure.
shocker. Yeah, right. Nothing to see here, folks. No selection bias at all. Keep on moving. Okay, thanks, bye.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but I think having example after example, it really just goes throughout. And it's not just his opinion and it's not just anecdotal evidence. I mean, he's talking about, laws that existed against specific groups, right? On 54, he's homosexuality, which has been around for as long as humans have been sneaking off into the bushes, was declared a perversion and outlawed throughout Europe. Black people were labeled and classified as subhuman, and slaves who ran away from slavery were diagnosed as having I don't know this word, drapetomania, an actual clinical medical diagnosis that was being used at the time that was scientifically proven, quote unquote, and it translates to runaway slave madness, that anybody who would run away from this situation must clearly have issues, right? Women
you
who
have
were
to mentally unwell because you ran away from your slave owner. Like, what the
why
hell?
would you leave this situation, right? Women were, quote unquote, scientifically proven, let's guess how in-depth those studies were, right, to be biologically inferior to men. So, right, I mean, and that's one of the things that I liked about this book. The first time I read it, I remember thinking that it was just going to be kind of anecdotal and fun and humorous and what. But then there's history that goes all throughout it, where he cites specific laws and specific, scientific studies and things like that that back up how we got to this place of normalcy. So, it's more. There's more content. There's more meat to the book than I anticipated the first time I read it, which I loved.
Yeah, that's it. He brought the receipts.
Yes, absolutely, which I love, right? Because otherwise it's just an echo chamber otherwise of you sitting there going, yes, somebody who feels exactly the way I feel. This is so amazing. Thank you so much for validating my thoughts and feelings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so just after that on 55, I love the fact that he says the medical model makes variability synonymous with sickness and puts the social, quote unquote, problem to be solved in the person, not the environment around the person. And I don't know about you, but I mean, society as a whole, we are just, it's never the environment. It's never society. It's never the other people. It's always that person. They need to bend. They need to flex. They need to learn new skills. They need to understand that things aren't going to revolve around them, right? They need to understand that they can't expect accessibility or accommodation. The environment is never being questioned. And I loved just having that statement there, kind of, yes, I literally wrote, I know you don't write in books, but like, yes, with like underlines and exclamation points, like, yes, this is so true. So absolutely true. And I made another note in my book a couple of pages later that on 58, we did an episode a little while back about why are homeschoolers called weird. And one of my theories, not necessarily tied to this exact section in the book, but I'll get there. I promise. I'm on my way. Is one of my thoughts is part of the reason that homeschoolers are often called weird is because there are so many neurodivergent homeschoolers. Why are there so many neurodivergent homeschoolers? Because the environment, the school system, doesn't know what to do with them. They either don't know how to deal with them, they don't have the time to deal with them, they don't have the resources to do whatever, right? But for
Mm.
whatever reason, our neurodivergent kids are just so poorly served in the school system for a variety of reasons. And so, are we weird because we're homeschooling? Or would we have been called weird in any environment because we don't fit the social model that exists, right? So, there's a bit of like a chicken or the egg situation for me that
Mm.
happens there with that, right? But then the other thing that I think is here on 58 is it says schools, factories, cities, towns, and even families are designed and built not for the reality of differences, but on the dream that we could and should all somehow someday be the same. There is this need for standardization. I mean, hello, we give standardized tests and things like that. We are measuring people on their sameness. And I think that's another reason potentially why homeschoolers get called weird is because I don't fucking want to be the same as everyone else, right? There's something
Yeah.
in me that is like, I have rebelled against that my whole life. And so you
Mhm.
can understand if society is so focused on this concept of sameness. And then you have somebody who comes around who's like, not only do I not want to be that thing, but I'm actively going in the other direction of that thing, right? That people would look at that person and go, there's something wrong with that one. Right. And we
Yeah.
are by definition doing something different from the rest of society by homeschooling our kids. It is still, even though the community is growing and the community is amazing and it's huge, it's not the dominant force in society. Public school is still the driver of society. That is the socially acceptable way to educate your children. And so there's another reason for us to be called weird.
Yeah, that's it. You don't accidentally homeschool. Um, like you're not like you wake up like one random October morning and be like, "Oh gosh, I forgot to register you for school and send you off in August." Like, oops, I guess we're homeschooling this year, right? Like it takes there's like a lot of active work and decision making and depending on where you are, hoops you have to jump through to be able to do it. Like you make a decision to
Hmm.
go against the grain and then you act on that decision um, for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. But
Hmm.
yeah, you have to be pretty sure about the fact that you want to be different to homeschool.
Yeah. It's definitely a conscious choice. And for those who do find themselves kind of, I always wanted to homeschool my kids, right? I never wanted to send them to school. They went to school for a very small period of time because my husband thought I was bananas. And then quickly went to, when he started going to school, was like, this place is a shit show. And I was like, yeah, I've been telling you that. I've pretty much told you that from the beginning. But I always wanted to homeschool my kids, right? But there's people now I find more and more who are homeschooling out of necessity because of how underserved their kids are, because their kids have a learning difference, have a learning disability, have health issues, have whatever that might be bringing them into this community. And so it's kind of this, again, they're doing that because their kids don't fit the molds. There's no way to accommodate their kids. There's no way to make it work for them. They're just salmon swimming upstream all the time in the school system. And it's like, okay, I didn't necessarily feel called to homeschool in that way or feel like this was my life's purpose, but we don't fit that mold. It's not working for us. So I feel like there's a bunch of reasons why we get called weird. And we talked about other ones in that episode. If you haven't listened to it, go check it out, right? The fact that our kids don't necessarily know that they have to filter their thoughts and actions to, whether or not it's cool for their peers. They just get to be them authentic. They get to be their authentic selves, or they have the time to explore really wacky interests. And when they launch into a whole conversation about, Sherman tanks from World War II, people are like, this kid's super weird. All the other kids I know are just talking about Minecraft, right?
Yeah.
And so, right? Yeah. So I totally
My
had your kid in
house.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking about him the other day because it was the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And there was so much coverage online. And I was so heartwarmed by how many veterans were there that 80
Mm.
years on. I mean, they're all, granted, there were some who enlisted at 16, snuck off forged papers, whatever, that enlisted at, 16, 17, but they're all pushing 100. And it was just so incredible. So many of them went to France and participated in it was incredible to see. So I was thinking about him the other day and I was like, oh man, he'd be all over, that energy that would have been there, and
Yeah, he would have loved
that
that.
historic moment. Yeah.
He
Absolutely
reminded me of
incredible.
it. Like, he reminded me no less than 4 times that day that it was the anniversary. It was clear that he wanted more from me than my oh, that's nice. Oh, really? Is it? Like, I did not have the energy to engage in more World War stuff.
More D-Day conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see why, I mean, the average 10, 11, 12-year-old is not having those conversations. And so, yeah, we get called weird, but I'll take that kind of weird any day,
Yeah.
I was thinking before when I was saying, like, those of us who've always rebelled against normalcy. So I went to a school with uniforms and a pretty strict uniform code. Like, even our shoes were uniform. And I just had to find something. And I was thinking about it when I was reading this book. I went to Stride Right. I don't even know if that still exists, but it was like a kid's shoe store.
Yeah.
And they used to sell these things called bow biters that when you tied the kid's shoes, you would attach them onto the bow so that it kind of held it into place. And they would sell them. Some of them had characters and stuff. And I will never forget, I was in high school and I went and got myself some Bert and Ernie bow biters and put them on my uniform shoes, right? There was nothing to your point in the last episode, you were talking about like reading the rules, like fine tooth combing the rules to find your exceptions. And I'm like, there's nothing that says that I can't adorn my shoes with something, right? But I needed something at 16, 17, something that made me unique. I needed something that was outside of the lines. And I rocked those bow biters all year long. I loved them, right? I'd still I'll probably hit up eBay to see if I can find myself a pair to rock right now. But I've just not been that person. And so it doesn't really surprise anyone, probably, the, completely left field path that we've taken raising our kids and educationally and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, if you read this book, you're like, oh, no wonder society thinks you're such a complete nut job, right? Like, yeah. Okay. I'll take it.
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, that's fine. I could be much worse.
Yeah.
So I guess that just kind of right after the page you were talking about, on page 59, the book starts diving more into the rehabilitation of those not normal, right, quote unquote, that really started in the 20th century. And it talks about the invention of special education. And I did appreciate the fact, right, there's the book, it can seem like there's some bashing of special education and rehabilitation and things like that. But he does actually stop and make a point that despite its many flaws, special education was progress. It is progress. And quote, he says, for much of human history, people with brain and body differences were denied education and thought incapable of learning. And it's so true, right? We saw that firsthand just last year. We did a month trip and we were in Madagascar for a lot of that time. And while there, we connected with a special education school, and it's a nonprofit run by someone from the UK, because they don't do that in Madagascar. The kids, there's no schooling. They're just left to their own devices. A lot of times they go with their parents to beg on the streets and things like that. It's a really unfortunate situation. And, we talk about whitewashing and Eurocentric ideas and stuff, but sometimes there's some benefit to that, right? Like, at least this organization has come in and they provide a place, and most of the parents, not most, but many of the parents teach in the school, or they cook the meals, or, so they have jobs there and they bring their kids, and the kids are learning to farm, or they're learning to cook, or, they're learning like life skills and some other things that could be a job or a source of income for them as they get older, because they're just not welcome in school. There's no schooling there that is available for them. And, we still have a long way to go as a world, as a society. We don't get things right. I know someone whose kiddo is in a pull-out special education class, and they were just informed that their entire district is taking all of the pull-out special education classes and moving them all to a singular building. And all of those kids who need that level of special education will be shipped to a single school, so none of the other kids have to deal with that or experience it or see it. And it's like, how can we be making such huge steps backwards, right? Like, I'm not saying every kid needs to integrate into a standard classroom, because that's not right for every kid, right? There should be options, right? There should be a lot of options, but one of them should not be taking all of the kids who can't assimilate into a standard classroom and hiding them away in a building so we can forget that they exist. Like, come the fuck on. Surely we are past that.
No.
Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. It makes me so mad.
No, we are not. There's a mention somewhere in the book. I don't remember exactly where it is, but that there's something about, like, if it makes other people uncomfortable, it's okay to remove people. And I forget where the historical reference was. I know I made a note of it somewhere. It's probably in one of our upcoming sections. But yeah, I mean, basically that's what's happening there, right? Like, this makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And it just sets the tone for then in the professional world, right? All those kids that are in the mainstream education room will eventually be hiring managers at a job or something like that, right? And somebody who comes in who, has a physical difference or a learning difference or something like that, why would we hire that person, right? They don't belong mixed in with everyone else. They belong.
That's not our brand. That's not our look. That's not, like, oh, fuck that.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so it's setting that tone for sure for it to carry forward outside of school as well.
Yep.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's a huge step backwards. That stinks. All right. On a much lighter note, I made a note on page 61 about part of Jonathan's recounting of his special education journey, talking about one of the things that needed to be corrected was his handwriting. And then he has a little aside, which make his book so much fun to read, which the aside was, without question, the most important skill for success in the modern world, handwriting, right? And I feel like in the homeschool world, there's so much focus on handwriting. I mean, how many posts do you see? Even people just like posting work samples. Like, is this okay for a third grader? Is this okay for a fourth grader? My kid holds their pencil this way. What would you do? What would you say? Can anyone recommend a pencil grip, a type of pencil? I mean, it's just endless, right? And we kind of had our own journey with handwriting with my oldest child, who's 16 and has multiple neurodivergent diagnoses and is so freaking smart and the funniest person. Like, never take a sip of water around this kid because he will just, without thinking, release one of these one-liners that is so dry and so sarcastic and so funny, and that water will come out your nose, right? It is a given. And so when he was younger and during his short 3-year stint in school, handwriting was a thing, right? His letters were all different sizes. They weren't formed, quote unquote, correctly. They were floating off the lines. They were too big. They were too small, whatever. Guess what? They still freaking look that way. And he's 16 and none of us care, because he's in college. He's doing amazing. He's excelling. Ironically, taking coursework that involves a lot of fine motor skills, but those fine motor skills don't carry over to handwriting for him. And so in the beginning, we were doing a whole bunch of stuff. Oh my goodness. There was OT, there was equine therapy, there was vision therapy, which there's a huge debate on whether vision therapy is helpful or just an entire crock of shit, right? And so when we were doing it, it was like, let's try it. Like, what's the harm, right? We were supposed to be in vision therapy for 6 weeks. 6 months later, we were still freaking there and nothing was changing, right? Oh, it's a convergence disorder. It's a this, it's a that. Oh my gosh. At the end of the day, first of all, he and I just got so tired, right? Because not only were we running hither and yon for all these appointments, but then on top of it, we were having homework. You have homework to do between OT sessions, between vision therapy sessions. Not so much for the equine therapy sessions. That would be some pretty challenging homework. But not having a horse of our own, right? But
not quite the same as bringing a service dog into your home. We have a service horse for
handwriting. People be like, what the hell? So, we did all this stuff. And finally, he and I were just burnt out. Like we were burnt out from the appointments and the homework in between and all this and no progress was being made. And
Mhm.
finally I was like, we're going to take a break. Right. So we decided to take a break that became a longer break. We're still on the break, FYI. It's been like 9 years. Right? We're still on a break, like Ross and Rachel from Friends. We were on a break. And let me tell you that the longer the break got, the less stressed my kid was, right? All of a sudden, he started relaxing in ways that I didn't even know he was tense. And he started being funnier and he started having more personality and all this kind of stuff. When we stopped asking my kid to do things that he was physically and mentally incapable of doing, the pressure came off. And it was like all those therapies. And I'm not saying don't go to therapy. I'm not. Your kid is your kid. You have to figure out what works for your kid, right? But for him, it was like a crucible that exacerbated every single thing that he had going on. And when we let it go, and yeah, his handwriting's terrible, absolutely terrible. But you know what? It's fine. It has not inhibited him in any way, right? I've talked before about the fact that he plays a lot of Pokemon. And when you play in certain tournaments, you need to submit a deck list. And there's templates online and the spaces are like minuscule. Like I think they're smaller than college worlds that you're supposed to fit your things in. He found a template that you can type into and he types up his list. He's fine. There's a workaround for everything, right? He struggles with like I don't know so much now, but when he was younger, like getting his snowboard bindings done when, he'd be up at the top of a mountain, it'd be windy and cold and he's got gloves on, big thick gloves with like a wrist guard in them and all that and all this stuff. And he's trying to get his snowboard bindings done. Well, you know what? It costs a little extra, but they freaking make step-in snowboard bindings so you don't have to do little threading little things through stuff, right? There's a workaround for all of it. And I'd rather have my kid be his authentic self than have tidy handwriting. And so for us, letting go of that was one of the greatest things that we've ever done for this kid. Like, I do not regret it at all. Now, on the flip side, at the beginning of the episode, I told you my other kid's working on handwriting. It's important to him. He wanted to. It was tied to a goal, right? The other kid was like, I don't really care, And so, and it hasn't hurt him. He's fine. He's more than fine. He's amazing.
Yeah. I will say one of the things that you have to keep in mind with that, right? And your kid is doing fine, but just more general for anyone who's listening. There are workarounds, but you may also need to be looking at accommodations depending on where your kid wants to go. And that it takes time. It costs money most of the time.
Yep.
It's not easy, and it's not cheap. But the reality is these things are changing. I was just reading some things recently about how some college professors are once again going back to you have to write your research paper by hand in the class in a blue book because they're having such a hard time figuring out how they handle AI and the ability to, yeah, exactly. And so, what is that going to look like when my kid's in college? I don't know. But the reality is he would have a really hard time and the professor would not be happy about trying to read whatever kind of research paper he would write out in a blue book, like on the fly. And so in those kinds of situations, it's probably going to change. GPT is going to change. AI is going to change. What that looks like in the future, we don't know. But it does kind of go hand in hand with that idea that, special education is important. Accommodations are important. Like, just because rehabilitation and the whole rehabilitation complex is really messed up, it doesn't change the fact that using the resources that you have at your disposal and keeping in mind that you may need to find some accommodations to help you achieve here or there, you may need to work on something or therapy for a short period of time or some other kind of thing. Like, these things, they are important and they are necessary. And, the author, Jonathan Mooney, he does talk about that both in the book and when we did our interview. It was encouraging to hear his kind of take on it and that thing of, look, there's a reality and there's a place we're trying to get to, and how you merge those two, it's not always easy, but they're definitely two very different things.
Mm-hmm. All right. Speaking of reality, there's like a hot flash situation occurring. I need to take my cardigan off my sweater. Hold on a second. I'm sitting here and I can feel my face starting to cook while you're talking. And I'm like, this is fascinating, but hold on a second. I'm still like the baby hot flash stage of life, but it's coming on. So there we go.
Yeah.
All right, cardigan shed. The melting is ceasing. Okay, can I soapbox for a second for our next topic? Like,
Sure.
okay, so on 63, I love this section here. It says, when I was in school, special education might as well have been one big sticker chart driven by a pre-modern token economy. Love this. Walk in the classroom quietly, get a token. Start working right away, get a token. Raise your hand, get a token. Sit still, get a token. Clean your desk, get a token. Say please and thank you, get a token. Express an original thought, no token. And then there was the gold star behavior chart. Stephen was at the top with 20 gold stars. Sally had 15, Jacob had 10, and then I had 100 stars, but all of my stars were black. Okay. So I have two thoughts on this. The first was, I don't know if anyone has experience with this class freaking dojo. Do you know what that is, Amanda? Do you know what this is?
I have heard of it. We never had to utilize it, implement it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. First of all, I don't need one more freaking app on my phone to track things. I'm already getting emails and robocalls and everything else when my kids were in school. I don't need to fucking look at Class Dojo. And could you imagine being a teacher and having to input dojo points at the end of your day when you are so freaking done? And then you have to input dojo points for like 18 kids and remember what they all did during the day. Okay, so I've previously shared that when my kid was in school, for the 3 years he was in school, every year, every day, he got quieter and quieter. He retreated inside himself even more. By the time I pulled him out, he was almost mute. He had no facial expression. He had an amazing teacher, right? I loved her. His first grade teacher, his second grade teacher was amazing. We won't talk about the kindergarten teacher. So amazing, right? But I get it. It's the end of the day. She's freaking done. And on top of that, too, he had two teachers because he was in a dual language program. So he spent half the day in an English speaking classroom and half the day in a Spanish speaking classroom. So at the end of the day, the two of them are just like slapping points, I think, in Class Dojo, right? It's just like, and I wouldn't blame them one bit. I mean, they've like been to battle all day long and now they're having to sit there and assign Class Dojo points, right? But here's this child who was not speaking anymore and he was getting rewarded in Class Dojo for being quiet. And I was like, I don't want him. I need him to speak. I need him to know he can. I need him to have a life, to have expression, to have a personality. Stop rewarding him, please, for being quiet. Like, it was just, I would look at it and I was like, oh my gosh. And he didn't see it, thank God. But I was just like, how are we still thinking that's a good thing for a kid who's so clearly struggling, right? That we're rewarding this. Again, I don't expect this from the teacher because I know their day sucks and how hard it is and how overwhelmed they are. And at 3 o'clock, they're freaking done. And then, like, she had 2 kids of her own, right? So not only is she done after that day, but she's got to now take a kid to baseball practice, help with homework practice. You know, I mean, their jobs are so hard, right? But I'm like, I would have, like, he needed dojo point in a perfect world. He needed dojo points for like having a conversation with a kid on the rug over by the library shelf, right? Like, that's what he needed dojo points for, so that I could then start a conversation and be like, oh, you were chatting with somebody about, you know, and I was like, ugh. But I love this concept that he brings up here about the pre-modern token economy, because I feel like to an extent, even in the world of homeschool, there's this token economy, right? Our house doesn't run this way, but I think that's why I see it so clearly when I see it in other people's conversations and stuff like that, right? We have no limits on anything. We have no anything. And that's not to say the kids are like zoo animals running the show, right? They've learned through the no limit system, they've learned to self-regulate. Right. So they've learned, like, they might play a game for a little while, but then they're going to go swimming or they're going to ride their bikes to the park. Right. I don't have kids who are 10 hours on a screen because that push and pull of limits is not there. Right. So there's no trying to force the limits or push the limits or anything like that. But I feel like even in the homeschool world, we've got that token system, right? It's like no screens until your work is done, or this, that, or the other thing, right? And so it's like a lot of that has carried over, I feel like, into other parts of our society. And I just loved that whole, the way he wrote it from his perspective, is it's like when you are behaving in a docile, agreeable, non-disruptive way, society loves you. And as soon as you express an original thought, or as soon as you march to your own beat, whoa, we're going to have some problems, right? Things are going to be restricted. Things are going to be timed. Things are going to be taken away, all of those things. So I found that part. I loved that part. And I was like, I love this. This is like speaking to the core of kind of how I view things. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about. I'm trying to think if we do that at all in our home. I'll have to think on that more. Yeah.
Yeah, and we are odd in that sense. Like I completely know that. I mean, I don't really have too many friends that manage that way and or float through life that way because I'm not really managing anything. It was like all the framework was set up years ago and now it just runs itself because the culture was built.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like I'm having to do it from day to day. Like there's no arguing about chores, there's no grumbling about chores. Like it's just it's kind of like this nice symbiotic, everybody's doing their thing and everybody's coexisting kind of thing. But it took time to get there, right? But they were just so young when we did it that it worked really well. So but I loved that because we had a really short period of time where we tried Minecraft. And I didn't know anything about Minecraft, but I knew I didn't want it, which is really ignorant of me to say I don't want something when I don't know anything about it, but I didn't want it. So my kiddo came to me and said, I want to take this coding class on OutSchool and it's Minecraft based. And I asked a whole bunch of questions and whatnot. And I was like, fine, we'll do it. And then he took another class on OutSchool that was really cool. It was like ancient civilizations in Minecraft. And so they would learn about like the ancient Greeks and their culture and their architecture style and all of this. And they would work in teams to build like the city center of, you know, a Greek town or whatever. Okay, great. That was good. It very quickly devolved into feeding cows and arguments on servers and all this stuff. And it was bad. It was really, really bad. It did not go well for us. And I've talked to other people who say like not all gaming, but certain games are more addictive for kids than other games. Like some kids can play game A, but they can't play game B. It like really messes with them, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I've experienced it with my own kid. Like one of my youngest kid gave up playing Genshin Impact because he was like, I feel like it disrupts my thoughts. Like it's all I can think about. And so he stopped playing it, which was tough because he was taking a social group on OutSchool and he really liked the teacher and he had some really nice classmates. And so giving up the game meant giving up that social piece also, but it was his choice and he did it and we're all still here. That was like 3 years ago. He's fine. So Minecraft was that game for us. It was just a total and complete shit show. And we tried doing the thing where we'd put limits in place and we tried doing a thing where we moved his computer to the kitchen and it was bad. Like the whole thing. I mean, this only went on for a couple of months, but it was bad. We went skiing for a week and about Wednesday, about middle of the way through the week, I started to see my kid again. And I went to him and we sat down and I said, listen, you know, we talk about everything and you always have a say in things and you know, I get your opinion and I want to know and I want to understand, you know, how you think would be best. And I go, every once in a while, I'm just going to let you know, like, I have to pull the mom card from time to time and just say, like, this is going to be how it has to go, you know? And so I said, I think when we go home, we're going to remove Minecraft from devices. And he was like, okay. And in the meantime, I signed him up for a photography and nature scavenger photography thing on OutSchool. It started right when we got back. So we had something else to focus on. He had something to do. He was outside. He was doing a thing, all that kind of stuff. And we literally walked through the door and I was like, time to remove it. And there was this moment, this like look on his face that was like, oh shit, she was serious about that. Like, I don't think he knew that it was going to be like that moment. And I was like, no, like it's a hard pull of the plug. And that was 5-6 years ago. I still contend it was like the best thing I've ever done as a parent. Like he ended up going super deep into photography, getting into astrophotography and doing all this kind of stuff. And that led to something else, which led to something else. And he's never missed it. And it was funny because after he kind of got off it, right? It's like a drug. Like he got off the Minecraft, he detoxed. He went to a dance that our co-op was throwing and he came home and he was so frustrated. He was like, Mom, these kids don't have anything to talk about. Like that's all they can talk about. Like it's not like it's one of the things that they can talk about, but then they also talk about their other interests. It's all they can talk about. And I was like, and at first I think there was a little bit of like, maybe I should play it so that I could be back in that thing. And I was like, okay, but like, is that the goal, is to like one-dimensionalize yourself just so you can fit in with this crowd of people? So there was a girl that I knew went to the dances who went to co-op, and I wasn't trying to like set them up or anything, but she ran her own chicken business. She like sold eggs and stuff. I said, why don't you go talk to her and just start up a conversation and be like, how are your chickens? You know, like, I mean, he was like 12, 13, you know, How are your chickens? That's a great conversation opener. And I'm like, she's got stuff to talk about. Like, just
Mhm.
find the people who have stuff to talk about.
Other things.
Um, yeah, but we tried the token system of like, you can have it for a certain number of hours a day, or you can have it this, and it was a disaster. It led to so much stress on our
Mm.
relationship. It led to stress in our house. It was awful. Like, so that token system piece really resonated with me because I was like, didn't like that. Didn't work for us. Was so unpleasant for all of us, right? It made me a cop. It made me the bad guy. And it was not fun. So yeah. And now we
Yeah.
have games. We have some games and it's a go with the flow. It's not a thing like, but I just, even in a household where it's super democratic, I was just like, I'm pulling the mom card here. We're done with this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we have that. We have a bit of both of those things, right? I think in your house, there are different ways to parent, but for us, that really including the kid and listening to them about a lot of things, it makes it easier when you do have to say, I have to pull the mom card on this, or the answer is no, or I need you to do this right now. And we'll talk about it more later. But right now, in this moment, this is what I need from you. It makes it easier for them to accept those moments because they know
Mm-hmm.
you're not constantly pulling the mom card, or you're not constantly controlling what they do. They know, like, I don't understand what's happening right now, but in this moment this is what needs to happen, or
This must be
this is a big,
serious.
yeah, this
Right.
is a
Yeah.
big enough thing that she feels the need to do that. And it does help have that. It helps create that dynamic where you can do that if you've got a little bit more of a democratic household, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And similarly, for us with screens, we don't have much screens, right? And for us, that comes from the fact that when he was young, we tried to do that. Oh, you give them free access and they have it, and all of that, and they learn to self-regulate, and I think that's working much better in your home. In our home, we found that he just couldn't figure out how to self-regulate, and there was so many more tantrums and so much more crying and so many more meltdowns, and so it had to become a, no, this does not work for whatever reason. It's too overstimulating, it's too much. And so we have it for academics, and Sunday mornings he gets to watch TV. He's got his unlimited Sunday morning time. Outside of that, it's only family time that we're watching things as a family together. He doesn't have that, but removing that constant negotiation of whether or not he can watch something or he can play something, or whether he's earned that, like, there are set times, there are set ways that it happens. And, yeah, just, it's so nice to not constantly be
Mm-hmm.
negotiating whether or not you can have this or that or what this looks like. And on a daily basis, God, what an exhausting way. I mean, if it works for you and it's going smoothly, awesome. For me, that just sounds exhausting.
Yeah. It was the
Okay.
most stressful few months of my life. I hated it.
Yeah. All right. So we got a little off track. I'm going to say just a couple pages later, we'll wrap up section 3. So on page 63, the author says, this is a direct quote. He says, most of my teachers were not like Mr. R. They were not bad people. In fact, most of my teachers were the opposite. Most were the best people who had decided to dedicate their lives to children. They were just doing what the textbook said to do. That's all. That medical model is still with us, and it defines disability as a property of the individual body that requires intervention and correction. I lost my sense of self to this perfect storm because I knew from the start that no matter what my mom said, I wasn't different, but deficient. And for me, it was like that's the thing, right? I think that's why so many parents of neurodivergent kids homeschool. You already brought that up. But it's to try to protect this idea that different isn't deficient. Different is just different. It's nothing more, it's nothing less. It's just different. And it's not something that we need to avoid being. It's not something we need to fix. But boy, oh boy, howdy, when you let your kid out into the real world, it's super quick. That message that different is deficient, different needs to be fixed. It's not okay. Like, whew, that comes at them from every direction so fast.
Yeah.
So hard.
That passage is heartbreaking, right? It's
Yeah.
just, and it's interesting because there's conversation. I have a kind of a dream guest speaker in my head who talks about a neurodivergence and has an account online that I follow religiously. And she talks about like the need for labeling. And it's like, that's the thing, right? That even if you don't have the labels, parents are like, well, I don't want to label them because it'll make them, feel different. They already feel different. They already know there's something different about themselves. They're already being
Yeah.
treated that way, right? Having the label at least says, the day one of my kids got an autism diagnosis was like the happiest day of my life, because then at least it gave me ammunition to be able to say, like, my kid's autistic. You have to accommodate my child, right? You have to do this thing that makes his path and my path smoother and makes this world navigable for him. And so having that diagnosis is amazing. There was a debate about it in a group the other day, and all these people were like, this person was like, is there a downside to getting a diagnosis? And there were a couple of people that were like, it might hinder their job ability. It might hinder this. And I'm like, no, get the diagnosis. Understanding who you are and how you tick, there's nothing more powerful than that, right?
Yeah.
And the odds that your kid is going to reach the career that they want without the diagnosis, because as it talks about in the book, like, they're made to feel so stupid or so lazy or so this or so that. They're not empowered. They're not given the tools that they need. They're not going to reach their full potential for a career anyway without the diagnosis. So at least give them the tools to get there in somewhat of a smoother fashion, right?
Give them the tools to get there. And they're sure as shit not going to put that diagnosis on their resume. So
Right. I'm like, that's the
what?
thing. I was like, how are people even finding out about this? I mean, the only thing I could think about was like, if it was a job that required like air traffic controllers, I think you need like a medical background or something. Like, that
Yeah.
was the only thing that my mind went to. But I was like, how is your kid losing jobs because they're autistic? Like, no one should be, no one needs to know that. I mean, my kid has a number of diagnoses. We have a service dog. You are not allowed to ask him his diagnoses. You're not allowed to ask him why he has a service dog. You're allowed 2 questions under US law. That's it, right? Anything else is a HIPAA violation, and he does not owe you that information, right? And so it's like, yeah, you get the diagnosis. It's fine,
Yeah. No, for sure.
You want to take us to
Okay.
section 4, Amanda?
Well, I do. But before we do that, I would like to go ahead and do our little sponsor thank you. So we'd like to take a moment to thank our premier sponsor, Hub of Curiosity. Hub of Curiosity is it is an incredible organization, but it has an incredible variety of classes, from virtual secular co-ops to engaging book clubs to sewing classes to car mechanic things. There's truly something for everyone. They're an inclusive organization, and they can't wait to welcome your child into an upcoming class. So you can find a link to their class listings in our podcast description here just below wherever you're watching, or also in our Instagram bio at home. Geez Louise, man, I can't read today. All homeschool moms, unfiltered listeners can use code OFCURE115. So that's OFCUR 115 for $15 off your first Hub of Curiosity class. So go check them out. They've got some really interesting, fun things.
Awesome. I know my 15-year-old is taking Percy Jackson graphic novel book club class in French in the fall. I know, right?
I mean, wow. There you go. My French is not that good. I know I said earlier that I speak French. My French is not that good. I will not be Percy Jackson-ing it.
Yeah, the book came from Amazon and it was so exciting. I was like, oh my gosh, this book looks so cool. So I'm excited for her. That'll be pretty exciting. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, thank you for that. And thank you to Hub of Curiosity. And what's your next book club thoughts?
All right. So now we're on section 4. And once again, we see this great, engaging, sometimes irreverent, witty style of writing cover yet another incredibly heavy topic. So we're going to talk about eugenics.
Right. Some light listening for your day, right? Somebody's listening like on the train or at the gym, and they're like, "Oh, eugenics. Okay, I didn't know we were going there today." Well, we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Jonathan Mooney brought us there. Okay.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So one of my favorite quotes from this section comes on page 80, and it says, "The irony is many of the most prominent eugenicists, is that how you say that? Were extremely odd and strange, the very type of people targeted for elimination." And um, there are examples in the book that are, far more steeped in history because he, like we said before, he brought the receipts. Like he's done a
Mhm.
very good job of supporting what he's saying here. From a personal perspective, that really struck a chord for me. Back when I was healthy and well enough to work a full-time job, I worked at a biotech nonprofit where they did a lot of research under a leader who is very well respected in the genomics field. And in that position, I met with, worked with, talked to all kinds of scientists and researchers that are world renowned. I worked with insanely wealthy, successful board members who came from biotech places and science places and just general tech places. Even to the point I actually met Watson, who is a quite questionable person, great, impressive science background, less impressive personality. But it's that, so many of the most amazing scientists that I knew and that I worked with, and the developers of the technology that we have today, they're a lot of really unique personalities. Like, one would argue that we wouldn't have the vast majority of the
Yes.
technological advances that we have today if we removed neurodivergence.
Yeah. Temple Grandin, who has some controversial thoughts about ABA therapy and stuff like that, but I've kind of listened to various things that she said and kind of skimmed through and fine tooth combed and taken what I've wanted. Said at one point there was a quote where she said, "Without autism, you were missing Silicon Valley, right? Most of Silicon Valley is empty without autism."
So
And
true.
and that might be a broad brushstroke. You could probably just put autism, dyslexia, ADHD, like all of that, make up in Silicon Valley. But yeah, there's a huge part of that, right? I mean, and I think sometimes when we look at the makeup of people, like Steve Jobs, right? So when you said about like amazing scientist, questionable personality, like Steve Jobs had some questionable things in his personal life, right? Like a kid that he never acknowledged and stuff like that, right? But he was without a doubt a tech genius. Okay.
Mhm.
But like Steve Jobs got fired when he was working at Atari because he would forget to shower and walk around the office barefoot, and people thought he was weird. They put him on night shift to keep him away from people, right? Hello, putting kids in another building because they need to be out of sight. They put him on night shift to get rid of him for a while. And then he was still too weird even for that. And they finally got rid of him, right? And it's like, these are the people who are revolutionizing technology or other industries. And, the ones that are wildly successful, we hold up and we go, oh my gosh, they're so amazing, and this, that, and the other thing. But in a classroom, they'd be pathologized and made to feel stupid and weird, right? I mean, Thomas Edison, you can say whatever you want about him as an inventor and whether or not he was more of an inventor or more of a businessman, but raging ADHD. I have my own personal theory. I would love to be able to go back in history and look at certain people throughout history and have them take modern day diagnostics. I'd actually love for them to be able to take diagnostic tools that are like 50 years from now that are even better than the ones we have now.
Yeah.
But right, that would be really amazing. But I have like a mild theory. Like Winston Churchill was like super scheduled human being, like had to nap every day at the same time, had to bathe every day at the same time, wouldn't allow paper clips staplers in his office. You had to fasten papers without staples. They had to bring in special typewriters because he couldn't tolerate the noise of a typewriter, things like that, right? Tell me that's not neurodivergence, right?
Yeah.
But Churchill was born in the 1800s. Nobody was going to diagnose him. And I certainly am not capable of doing that, right? But I have like a little breadcrumb trail that I'm like, right? And so, yeah, I mean, some of these amazing people that impacted the world so tremendously did so because they viewed the world differently, they thought differently, they problem solved differently. But if you're not one of the ones that becomes super successful or whatever, and you're just living your day-to-day life, you're weird, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're an outcast, you're an odd duck, you're a
Yeah.
problem, you take up too many resources. Yeah.
Unacceptably weird. No
Yeah.
longer acceptably weird, unacceptably weird, because you're
Mhm.
not, providing and giving into society the way that we expect. So you didn't make the cutoff. Sorry.
No, exactly.
Aw.
So as a history nerd, I jumped way ahead for my next note, which was on page 97. So in our last episode, we were talking about curriculum choices, and Amanda talked about finding history curriculum that isn't super whitewashed, that isn't super Eurocentric, that isn't just made up of fairy tales and lies about the way things actually happened. Right? Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Don't ever make us feel bad about things that we did in history that were not appropriate. Right. Mm-hmm. So interestingly, on page 97, here's a fact that I bet none of us learned in history class. And again, at the back of this book, you've got how many pages here? 220. We've got about 15 pages of citations for studies and laws of where all this stuff came from, right? So this is not just like, I saw it on a Reddit post or I read it on Wikipedia, right? There's actual information here.
I saw a meme.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So on page 97, they're talking about, you can't talk about eugenics without talking about Hitler. And so there's a comment here that says in 1934, the Third Reich sterilized at least 56,000 people, 1 out of every 1,200 Germans. By the end of the war, 375,000 Germans had been sterilized. And of course, sterilized because they were not worthy of breeding. They held characteristics that were inferior, right? Mm-hmm. The interesting part that I never learned in history, how about you, Amanda, says this was, according to the Third Reich, an American model sterilization law, that they were basing this off things that we were doing in the U.S. It reminds me of like Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. He talked about the fact that the architects of apartheid came to the United States to study racism. They were like, those Americans, they're doing racism.
They got it.
Right.
They've got it figured out.
Right. Let's go figure out what they're doing and then let's one up it, right? Or let's make it our own. We'll put our own spin on it, right? And so this is the same thing, right? It's like Hitler didn't invent this. This was already going on. We were sterilizing people in this country, but you never hear about that. We've all heard about how Hitler was doing it, but you never hear about the fact that in group homes and things like that in the United States, that this was standard practice. So I found that super interesting.
Yeah, no, me too. I have almost the exact same note, right? There's several pages about the history of eugenics, and it's eugenics government programs and university departments here in the US and the long history of forced sterilizations here in the US, which continued into the 21st century. There are documented cases from 2010. Like I was shocked. I was really shocked. These are things I was not taught anywhere. That I did earlier mention Watson and Crick, and I did know that he advocated some of that nonsense, and he's still around, right? He's still alive, and he's still spewing some of his ridiculous hatred for that kind of stuff. But I didn't realize people were still doing it just because someone with a bit of a platform and a big research lab has said that maybe we should consider it. I didn't realize that, like, how pronounced and how accepted it was. And there's some case law that could still support it. And like, I truly, it blew my mind, and I like reading books that teach me things. So I appreciated not only learning something, but also having, the way that it's presenting, because we've talked about that. He's got a great writing style. So it's really palatable for what awful things you're learning.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it's so disheartening when you think about the fact that, like, okay, there's still case law that supports forced sterilization. Yeah. And as a parent of somebody who needs accommodation in order to move through this world, you're thinking, like, that's the hill. I mean, that's more than climbing Everest, right? That's the societal view of different. And that's the hill that we're climbing when we're advocating for our children, which is just a bit daunting, which is one of the questions that I asked Jonathan Mooney. It was like, how do you not feel completely overwhelmed and daunted about this? So definitely tune in when we get at the end of our book discussion. Amanda and I will air that interview. And his answer was awesome. my goodness. Well, we've ended on a really heavy topic today. So you go have
Oh,
an
go.
amazing day thinking about eugenics and everything else.
I might go take a shot of tequila to lighten the mood. I won't judge you if you do the same.
There you go. Next week, we'll be talking about a new section of the book. The book is amazing. Like, it sounds heavy and all of that, but as Amanda said, and she pointed out multiple times, like, he has a way of writing about the Nazi eugenics program that somehow is light enough that you don't want to, bury your head in the sand. And it's really informative and at times funny, amazingly enough. So amazing book. Don't forget to enter our giveaway that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. We've got about 5 weeks left on that, and we would love to send you a copy of this book. And we'll talk to you next week. In the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Yeah, have a great one.